Let's be real for a second. You're not just giving them space. You're sitting in your apartment at 11 p.m., phone face down on the table, fighting every single impulse in your body to just say something, anything, a meme, hey, saw this and thought of you. Even a voice note you'll never send. And the worst part, nobody told you what's actually supposed to happen during this silence. People just say, trust the process, and disappear. Like, that's enough. Like knowing there's a process makes it any easier to survive Tuesday night alone with your thoughts. Here's what I want to do today. I want to walk you through exactly what is happening. Not in some vague motivational way, but psychologically, behaviorally, in real terms. When you go quiet with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, because silence with an avoidant isn't neutral, it is active, it is doing something. The question is whether you understand what it's doing, and whether you're setting yourself up for the right outcome or the wrong one. Let's get into it. The first thing that happens, and it's not what you want to hear. Right out the gate, the very first thing your silence creates for an avoidant ex is relief. And I know that stings to read, but if you don't understand this piece, nothing else that follows will make sense. People with avoidant attachment styles developed that pattern because, somewhere along the way, closeness started to feel like a threat. Not in a dramatic, obvious way. Usually it's subtler than that. Maybe their emotional needs were dismissed growing up. Maybe they learned that needing people led to disappointment. Whatever the origin, the result is a nervous system that registers intimacy as something to manage rather than enjoy. So during the relationship, and especially in those final weeks when things were charged, there was a constant, low-level hum of tension on their end. Not because you did anything wrong, just because closeness does that to them. And they often can't even name it. It lives in the background like a sound you stop noticing until it's gone. When you go silent, that hum stops. The first week, maybe two, they breathe differently, they sleep better, their shoulders come down from around their ears. This is the decompression phase, and it is completely real, and it absolutely does not mean they have moved on or forgotten you or don't care. What it means is that their nervous system finally got the one thing it's been quietly screaming for: space. Now, here's what most people do wrong. They interpret the early quiet as confirmation of their worst fear, that the silence means nothing, that the avoidant feels nothing, that they have already been replaced in the emotional landscape, and so they break contact too soon. They send the, hey, just checking in text right when the decompression is still running, which is exactly like walking back into a room that someone just finally got comfortable being alone in. So what do you do with this? You let it happen. You do not treat the first 2 weeks of quiet as a measuring stick for anything. It is not data. It is just the exhale before the next breath. The shift that happens. When they stop running from something and start moving towards something, somewhere past that decompression. And the timing varies a lot, so I'm not going to give you a magic number. The internal experience of your avoidant ex starts to change texture. The relief slowly gets quieter, and into that quiet, something else begins to move. Let me paint this out with a specific scenario so it lands properly. Say his name is Jordan. Jordan and his ex, Simone, broke things off about a month ago. Simone has been silent. No texts, no social media pokes, nothing. Jordan spent the first few weeks feeling like he could finally think clearly, made plans, caught up with old friends, told himself he was good. Then one afternoon, he's at the grocery store, and he sees the specific brand of sparkling water Simone always used to put in his fridge when she came over, and it just stops him for a second. Not a breakdown, nothing dramatic, just a pause, a small involuntary recognition that something is missing. He gets home, checks his phone, nothing from her. And for the first time, that absence doesn't feel comfortable. It feels like a gap. That's the moment the equation starts to shift. That's when avoidant psychology begins to work in a different direction than it was before. See, one of the quieter truths about avoidance is that their avoidance is partly sustained by the assumption that the other person will always be there, that the emotional door is always open, that if they want to walk back through it, they can. Your consistent presence, or your consistent attempts at contact, actually fed that assumption without you realizing it. When the assumption gets disrupted, when the door seems like it might not be standing open anymore, that changes the calculation in ways they aren't always prepared for. The longing starts to surface, but without your presence nearby to minimize it or push back against, it has nowhere to go except inward, and avoidants, for all their emotional guardedness, are not actually empty inside. They feel things deeply. They just do it quietly and alone. This is when the real processing begins for them, and you being quiet is the only reason it gets a chance to happen. The split road, because silence doesn't always lead, where you think, okay, here's where I need to be honest with you, because I'm not interested in giving you a fantasy when reality would serve you better. Silence with an avoidant creates one of two outcomes over time, not three, not a spectrum. Two real distinct directions, and which one you're heading toward depends on a few honest factors. The first direction, the silence creates genuine reflection. Your avoidant X starts to examine not just what they lost, but why they always seem to create this kind of distance. They start to feel the weight of the pattern rather than just enacting it. And at some point, if they have any self-awareness at all, they start to wonder whether the way they handled things was actually what they wanted, or just a familiar reflex. The second direction, the silence confirms the story they already wrote about the relationship. This one's harder to talk about. If your avoidant X exited with a clean narrative, we weren't right for each other. We wanted different things. It just ran its course. And nothing challenges that story. Your silence can actually reinforce it, because you're gone and they feel okay, and the story holds up. There's no new information coming in. So how do you get a read on which road you're on? Think back to how things actually ended. Was there one specific breaking point, or was it a long, slow unraveling? Did they say anything, even offhand, even buried in something else? That suggested they still cared, even while they were pulling back. Were they conflicted in those last weeks, or just cold? These aren't trivial details. They're the difference between silence that opens a door and silence that lets one close quietly behind you. This is also why going into no contact with clarity about your reasons matters. If your only goal is to get them back, you're going to spend this entire time watching for signals and missing the work that actually needs to happen in you. Which brings me to the part of this conversation that most people skip right over. What the silence is actually doing to you, and why. That's the bigger story. Flip the camera for a second. Because everything we've talked about so far has been about what's happening inside your ex. And I want to redirect your attention, because the more important transformation during this silence isn't on their end. It's on yours. Early and no contact, most people are running this whole thing as a strategy. They're quiet, but it's a performance of quiet. They're waiting for the payoff. They've got one eye on their phone and one eye on the stopwatch, asking, how much longer do I have to do this before something changes? And that orientation, treating silence like a move in a game, actually keeps you emotionally stuck, because you're still defining your whole psychological state around what they do or don't do. Something real starts to happen, though, around the 4 or 5 week mark for a lot of people. The grip loosens just a little. Not dramatically, you're not suddenly over it, but you go a full morning without the first thought being about them. You laugh at something, genuinely, and realize you haven't done that in a while. You make a decision about your own day without doing the mental calculation of what they would think about it. Think about what's actually happening there. Your nervous system is starting to recalibrate to a life that isn't organized around another person's emotional availability. And that recalibration, that is not nothing. That is the groundwork of becoming someone different than the person your ex broke up with. Here's why that matters more than you might realize. The dynamic that existed in that relationship, the push and pull, the anxious reaching, the over-explaining, the fear of saying the wrong thing. That dynamic was built by two people together. It wasn't just their avoidance. It was also your response to their avoidance, which probably looked a lot like chasing. Not because you're broken, because that's what anxious and avoidant attachment styles do when they meet. But the person coming out the other side of 6 weeks of genuine silence, not strategic silence, not performed silence, but real engagement with their own life. That person moves differently, talks differently, carries themselves differently. And an avoidant X, whose nervous system is exquisitely attuned to levels of neediness and independence, will feel that shift even if they can't name it. So, what do you actually do with this time? Not stay busy. That's advice for someone who isn't paying attention. I mean, figure out what you were looking to this person to give you that you haven't found a way to give yourself. That question right there, sit with it. Write it down if you need to, because it holds more of your future than any amount of careful texting strategy ever could. The signals that tell you it's actually working all right. Let's get concrete. Because you've been sitting in the uncertainty long enough that you deserve some clarity about what it actually looks like when the silence is moving things in the direction you hoped. First thing to understand, it almost never starts with a direct conversation. Avoidants don't go from complete withdrawal to heartfelt reaching out in a single step. That's not how their nervous system works. What you'll see first is what I think of as low-stakes contact. Things small enough that they can walk them back if you don't respond the way they hope. They'll start watching your stories again after a stretch of nothing. Not just the newest one. Sometimes you'll notice they've gone back through a few in a row, like they were catching up. They might send something light, a clip, a photo of something, a throwback reference to an inside joke. That doesn't require you to respond emotionally, but communicates that you've been in their head. A mutual friend might mention your name in a conversation in a way that feels slightly too deliberate to be accidental. None of these things are accidents. They're an avoidant nervous system trying to reopen a channel at the lowest possible emotional risk. They're checking whether the door is still there and whether it's safe to knock on it. What you do with these signals matters just as much as the silence that created them. If you flood the moment, long emotional texts, declarations, immediate deep conversation, you collapse the space you spent weeks building. Match their energy, maybe even stay slightly lighter than that. Let them take another step before you close the gap. The goal in that early re-engagement isn't to resolve everything. It's to create a new experience of contact that doesn't immediately reactivate the old dynamic. The hard truth about what silence alone can and cannot do. Here's something I think deserves its own moment because I see people get this wrong constantly. Silence is not a relationship solution. It is a reset. Those are not the same thing. If you go quiet for 8 weeks and spend every single one of those days just waiting, just enduring, just white-knuckling your way through the calendar, and then you re-engage, you're going to walk right back into the same pattern you left. Because nothing inside you changed. You just took a long pause and called it healing. The avoidance nervous system doesn't come back and stay back in a sustainable way because you waited them out. They come back or they stay open to rebuilding something when the dynamic they're returning to feels genuinely different, when there's less pressure in the air, when the person standing in front of them doesn't seem organized around the fear of losing them. When closeness for once doesn't seem to come with that invisible price tag attached. Creating that requires actual inner work, not the Instagram version of inner work, the real kind, the uncomfortable kind, the kind where you look at your pattern of choosing emotionally unavailable people and stop blaming them for being unavailable. And if you do that work, honestly, not performatively, one of two things happens. Either your avoidant X returns to someone they genuinely want to try again with because the thing that made intimacy feel dangerous has shifted, or you emerge from this silence so clear on what you actually need and what you actually deserve that when they do re-enter or don't, you're standing on solid ground either way. Both of those are wins, even if only one of them feels like one right now. The ending. You didn't know. You needed to hear. You started this silence because someone told you to, or because you ran out of options, or because you finally got tired enough to stop reaching. Maybe all three, and you've been holding it day after day, wondering what it's adding up to. Here's what I want you to actually take from all of this. The silence isn't just about them. It never was. Yes, it creates conditions inside an avoidant X that can open a door back to connection. That part is real and worth understanding. But the deeper current running under all of it is the question of who you are becoming while the silence holds. The version of you that existed the day after the breakup, raw, terrified of being forgotten, measuring every hour by whether they reached out, that person was in pain. That person needed the silence to survive more than they needed any text back. And the version of you at 8, 10, 12 weeks in, if you've used this time the way it deserves to be used, that person is someone your ex has never actually met. Someone steadier, someone who doesn't need to perform okayness because they're building actual okayness, brick by brick, day by day. That person is worth coming back to, for you first. And maybe, if it's right, and if the timing lines up, and if both people have grown enough to hold it, for them too. But either way, that person doesn't disappear if things don't go the way you hoped. That person stays. And that is the part that belongs entirely to you, no matter how this plays out.